I call this May 21st, 2025 Finance and Resource Committee meeting to order. The time is 10:07 a.m. The Fisher Administrative Building. Now call for the roll call.
Here.
Is somebody here? I'm here. To go. All right, then I have to go over the other agenda.
Are we recording? Perfect, thank you.
Okay, moving on to public comment. Do we have anyone here for that? No.
I think you can just skip the statement.
All right, the statement's not in the agenda, so I will skip it. And let me move on. Oh, sorry, I missed number one, approve the minutes. So going back to agenda item one, call to order A, approve minutes from April 9th, 2025. I move to approve the minutes from the April 9th, 2025 Finance and Resource Committee meeting.
I second.
And then I call roll.
Yep.
Liz?
Yes.
And I am a yes. Okay, minutes are approved. There is no one in the room for public comment, so we will move on from that. Then going to agenda item number 3, discussion, starting with a 2024 referendum update.
Okay. Great. Good morning, everybody. So the webpage has been updated. I think, Tim, if you can scroll up, we've got the April update, and I think that went out, another communication that Jesse put out. So a lot of work has occurred. The core team is meeting every 2 weeks on a regular basis. The schematic design phase for phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 projects are for the fall of this year, which are essentially multiple lighting and all exterior door replacements. That is completed, and phase 2 constitutes everything else in the referendum package that will likely be in 2 separate bid packages. So the purpose of the schematic design is that we understand all deliverables and what the completed or the conceptual design should. We've met with building principals, reviewed some secure entry remodels and bathroom remodels. So now VGS is tasked with going out and doing some schematic design budgeting. They will bring that back to us sometime in June. And then that's that point when we'll know, we'll confirm that we're within the budget outlined in the referendum. If not, then we'll begin the task of revising scope and design to get back under budget. So a lot of good news there. We're keeping the principals engaged. There's some really good remodel scenarios for like Roosevelt, Madison, Washington secured entry. Really, really good stuff to make that entry and restrooms a better place. Other work that we're doing now, also we have a team of Tulsa people that are working on the integrated security system we're going to try and put in the buildings. So if you're not aware right now, we have essentially 3 separate systems. One for after hours alarm notification for a burglar alarm. We have the surveillance system, and then we also have the card access system. Typically, a true or best practice scenario for security is they're all on, it's one system that everything hangs on. So what we're trying to do right now is the opportunity of replacing all these exterior doors is the best time to look at, let's begin to put in something that can integrate all these systems, that can monitor doors, alert staff when doors are propped open, perform true lockdown scenarios when doors are electronically unlocked. And we're working very aggressively with our vendors on that now to try and develop that scenario in the bid documents. The goal here is to make the high schools a priority for that integrated system, where the greatest need is for door monitoring. And then that would set the pace for transitioning the other secondary schools and elementaries into that fully integrated system. So I can answer any other questions that you have. Sure.
Mr. LaFountain, is there any scenario in which the district would have the ability to not use any of the referendum dollars and pause all projects associated with the facility referendum that was passed in November of 2024?
Is there any scenario we can pause? Yes. We would just have the obligated cost for professional services at this point. But nothing's been bid out at all, correct?
Is it based on the condition of the facilities, is that your counsel to us? That we should,
I'm not sure I understand. the question.
maybe another way of putting it is, the condition of the facilities are such that these projects are necessary. Is that a fair assessment?
I'll jump in. I don't think we would have recommended to the board that they put a referendum forward if we didn't think they were necessary.
Thank you.
Correct. And I would define necessary as if you want to continue operations
And we do.
with the greatest reduction of risk,
Yes, sir.
interrupt operations, and for safety, that all ties into it.
So thank you. I want to use a normal collaboration and paraphrase.
Okay.
You're saying if we intend to use these buildings and we want them to be safe, then proceeding with these projects are in the best interest of children.
Yes.
Thank you.
I have a question. When you say that the schematic budgeting is going to should be delivered in June, will that be to this committee or the full board?
I have a note, we have a communications meeting with VJS coming up. I have a note that I think there's a board meeting in July.
Okay.
We have targeted for a presentation of that progress to the board.
Will be July 28th.
Is that it? Okay.
Yes.
There's also an upcoming agenda item today where we can, these two things kind of blend together.
Thank you. And then with the integrated security systems, is that something is that like at the beginning phase of putting all of that together? Or when would you anticipate the district having an integrated security system?
So the opportunity I mentioned for replacing all exterior doors is that opportunity to put in the physical
I see.
the switches in the doors, the wiring and everything else. Those doors would not be installed till the fall of this year.
Okay,
So the goal is that the doors and the wiring are in place as they're being installed. And then in tandem with that, we're working on the technology behind that.
okay,
And that we will transition through the 25-26 school year with implementing those changes on the side.
Yeah.
With the goal that we can perhaps go online with the new system at some point during the 25-26 school year.
thank you.
But like, follow up earlier the question to that, in regards to the secondary ad hoc, committee, they may or may not make recommendations as to building configuration changes, which I would assume. I know you're already planning for trying to push as much as possible of that stuff past the recommendation deadline. This sounds like that might be kind of on the fringe of that, if you're
What specifically?
like, so if we're talking about the security system and then exterior doors for the high schools, which is the second part of the secondary school model that's going to be evaluated. I just want to make sure that we're not doing something that then all of a sudden
Yeah,
may get recommended that we
I understand.
either expand or contract, and then the board votes in order to do one of those things.
So I would go back to why the high schools were included for ADA upgrades in the referendum to begin with. And my understanding is that we feel very confident that the high schools are not going anywhere. They're staying regardless of secondary planning, right?
Based on the 7 models Mr. Wadier, based on the 7 models, the high schools are mainstays.
Okay.
The middle schools are the ones that are in question, depending on which model the ad hoc committee
Sure.
recommends. And I want to be very careful in talking about process. And then eventually the board decides which of the models continue to be deliberated all over in models.
So the ad hoc committee will make its recommendation and the reasons for it, but ultimately the board still
Yes, sir.
will make the decision on which model and of those 7 models, there may be an 8th or a 9th model that they come up with. We don't know, but
Yeah.
it's a pretty safe assumption to say the high schools will be there, and if anything, you would just be looking to add on to that security system at a later point. Because if some of the models include expanding out those building envelopes.
The exterior door project and the security, integrated security is something you need regardless. And it would not be wasted effort. Now, I'd imagine if you put an addition on to one side of west or something, perhaps those doors that were replaced, they could just be repurposed elsewhere in the building, right? And then to go further into that answer to your question, the other ADA improvements within both high schools, which are essentially classroom doors and some restroom stuff, we're trying to push that out as far as we can in bid package 3, which would be November of 26, when I believe there'd be a decision made on what the secondary ad hoc recommendation, the board.
January, yes, sir.
Yeah, January.
Mhm.
The board will have given you enough guidance by that point.
So I would envision a scenario where we're coming back to the board in November of 26 before we send that out and saying, do you still want to do this high school work? Knowing that a lot of those spaces could be disrupted again, right?
Okay, that answers
That
all
your
my
question?
questions. Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Anyone else have questions related to this agenda item? All right, then moving on to 3B, lunch fees.
Tim, is like opening that up? Thank you. So a brief discussion on lunch fees and then my recommendation would be that the committee take this to the board as board action. We have not updated lunch fees in a number of years. As you know, inflation and food costs continue to go up. We're fortunate in that our Fund 50, so food service fund, runs slightly in the black. There's many districts that is not the case, and they end up funding their food service from the operating fund. So we want to maintain that that slight surplus. So like, for instance, this year we were able to replace a freezer using some of that fund balance. So in order to keep up with essentially, Tim is navigating here. And so in order to keep up with inflation, we're recommending a slight increase, about a dime to 15 cents on lunches, as well as breakfast. You can see we haven't increased the breakfast cost since 21-22, and we did not make any increases to lunch last year, but we're recommending we make an increase this year.
I think that makes complete sense. We didn't do an inflationary increase during the biggest period of inflation. And you're recommending basically inflationary or slightly less than, depending on which one we're talking about. So I would say, yeah, we should be brought to the board for a stamp. Okay.
Thank you.
We need to make a motion to move that to full board or just put that asset added to the agenda for a full board meeting.
Ms. Wadier, Ms. Ron, this is the power of a committee. You have the ability to say that you recommend the change in fee that will then inform the remaining board members on where you stand as a committee. So you could generally, there's a range. You could simply say, move it on to an agenda item for a future board meeting, or you could say something more in the affirmative that will then send a message to the remaining board members.
I would like to say something more in the affirmative, if you would agree, that way it would. My guess is that it would limit the amount of discussion time on something that seems to make numerical sense.
Agreed.
So what does that look like procedurally?
Someone should make a motion that says, as the Finance and Resource Committee, hypothetically.
Yeah.
Someone could make the motion that the Finance and Resource Committee endorses the recommendation of a price increase for lunch for the 2025-2026 school year.
Yeah, and you could add as presented, and then
Just getting it down. Okay, so then, I would like to make a motion that the Finance and Resource. What did you say? The Finance and Resource Committee endorses the lunch fee increase as presented. To the board at the next available meeting. May I have a second?
Second,
And roll, Liz,
yes.
and I'm a yes.
so procedural, what we'll do is we'll add that as an agenda item, and I can use the language from the minutes.
Okay.
As,
Trying to be really.
I know,
good with my minute.
and we can paraphrase the language too. Essentially, I think what we're trying to get at for the board is we presented this to the committee had some discussion about it, and the committee recommends that the board approve this.
So unless someone in the board has very strong
Yeah,
feelings otherwise, which may be the case, and we're totally willing to.
Yep.
To hear that out, and if it needs to, much like the policy committee.
Then I'll.
It could come back to this committee, or the board would just accept, just
I
restate.
think they would still vote.
Still vote to.
They would still
accept
vote
it.
but where I've seen this work with, where committees make the recommendation,
Yeah.
there tends to be very limited discussion, because the board is trusting that that's been vetted by the committee.
Okay.
So it's almost like right, so
It wouldn't go on the consent agenda because unlike the policy, we don't have a
Correct.
first reading.
Correct.
So essentially, we're doing a first reading of it and also then voting in the same, taking action in the same board meeting. Okay, understood. All right, any other questions or comments? Okay, then moving on to 3C, financial analytics.
Tim, could we share this as well, please?
Mhm.
So I'm trying to make it a monthly or bi-monthly, just sort of learning or teaching time. Pulling up just a few different analytics for this committee. We've already, in the last few months, looked at our employee pay. We looked at how our FTEs have changed. And I thought this month, as part of our financial analytics, I would just. Did I upload, is the wrong thing uploaded?
No, I think
Oh, okay.
Word docs is probably too slow because I have the right one in mind.
Me too, the enrollment.
Yeah. So what I wanted to do is share with this committee just our recent enrollment analysis, since enrollment really drives both how much revenue we get from the state and how we're going to invest our money. So why don't we give it a second here? Or 10 minutes, whatever.
Or board.
There we go. Okay, cool. So our revenue is driven by both total enrollment and also our enrollment demographics. So types of students that we educate is also a driver, but the primary driver is total enrollment. That's actually, part of my work previous to here was working on school finance in other states. And that's a commonality across all states, is generally the number of students you have and the makeup of those students is the main driver of how much money you get. Now where that money comes from is different from state to state, but the total pot is usually driven by some kind of count of number of students and what those demographics are. And then our expenditures are should be driven by the total enrollment, right? What those enrollment types are and the needs of students based on the type of student they are, as well as the community's priorities. And I think sometimes that's where probably that's the hardest part of any school district to budget is how do you best reflect the community's priorities in a budget when in many communities those priorities are like all across the board, right? So you're trying to
They're shifting, moving.
yeah,
Year.
and what's important to one person isn't important to their neighbor. But collectively is our budget a reflection of the collective community, and it should be. Thanks, Tim. So I just included only just a few slides here about our general enrollment. So you can see this slide is showing we're generally decreasing. This is going to be our I'll call it students in seats. So students we educate. We'll see this continue to go down as we draw down open enrollment. But we're decreasing both as total students we educate as well as residents. Residents, the decline is flatlining a little bit. So I think going forward, we're going to see the primary reduction being in open enrollment students. Thank you, Tim. This is a picture of our types of enrollment broken down by race and ethnicity. So you can see we're not changing drastically, but there are a few segments that are gaining or losing. And I think it's just important to have this picture. This is how our economically disadvantaged population has changed over time, as well as our English limited English proficiency or English language learners, or a decade ago was English as a second language, all kind of the same term. So we're very low there. We have hovered around that 20 to 25% mark as economically disadvantaged. And you can see where we were growing kind of during COVID, reached a peak. We fell after COVID and we're slightly climbing. This is our enrollment by grade level. So if someone were wondering why are we decreasing in enrollment, that's fine, Tim. You can see kindergarten on the far left, 12th grade on the far right. As those classes graduate, generally we aren't bringing in kindergarten or fifth grade classes as large as our high schools. Now, in some school districts, you'll see occasionally a much larger spike at 9th grade than we have, or sometimes at 6th grade. In the school districts I've worked in where, say, the private schools ended in 8th grade, you'll see this big spike in 9th grade, or if the private school ends in 4th grade, a big spike in 5th grade. We don't generally see that because the dynamics of our private schools are just a little different here. And then these graphs show us where we're changing essentially in our community kind of by neighborhood. We generally have neighborhood elementary schools as well as secondary schools. And so some of our schools are significantly increasing in enrollment and some are decreasing enrollment. And that is why when I've talked in the past about why it's hard with this many schools to align staffing with class size and enrollment, if we were declining by, you saw earlier our overall decline was say 5% or something. If that were 5% even at every building, it would be far easier to anticipate staffing. But you can see when we're going up 25% or 12% even at Lincoln and down at 9% at Madison, it creates other challenges for Sarah. So it's just something that we also want to be aware of.
Well, I would assume it's harder too when you have trend lines that are up and down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, the ones going, either straight up or straight down are probably a little bit easier to work with. If you're making your assumptions.
Yeah, yep. And now someday, right, someday Madison will, I don't know that neighborhood very well, but let's pretend that it's empty nesters there. When that neighborhood turns over, now we'll see that increase again someday, so. It's one of the functions that it does make having our number of elementaries difficult.
Well, when you talked about sort of like the last part of where to spend our money, the what the community wants, I think that that is unique to us because our community has repeatedly said they want these smaller
Correct.
neighborhood schools, so I think that's important too, when we see this, that the instability is kind of because of the community wanting the small neighborhood community schools.
Yeah, no, and that's, I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't want anyone thinking that. It creates a challenge that is unique to districts like ours that have this, the neighborhood elementary concept as its core culture.
And if in the future, like you said, the families shift over, the neighborhood in general may stay the same, may completely shift over. Future boards, future decision makers would then decide whether or not we want to keep the same elementary footprint. Because that seems to me, my observation over the last 8 months or whatever, is that huge elementary footprint is like one of the biggest challenges that finance has to work around and build and having got to work around because it's we don't have it at scale where versus another district that might have the same number of students but 4 elementary buildings where you get a bunch of cost savings, you can staff easier. You don't have to have your crew run around to all these different buildings. So kind of restating those observations for anyone who's gonna watch this,
Exactly.
the 5 people that might watch it. All right,
So, not, you don't have to decide now. If there are other analytic kind of things you want to see in future months, I don't have all the ideas, so if you think of something you want to see, let us know. And I want your input on what you want to see as well.
do we have some analytics of when we very well may there, but there's a lot of stuff thrown at us. So I'm just trying to think. Something that has come across my email several times is cost per pupil, and it's kind of usually thrown out as just one number. But I'd like to see kind of like a breakdown like this of maybe year over year for the last 4 or 5 years, just like you have in this last slide of each of the schools and the cost, like I guess cost per pupil or some sort of ratio that would, like, I'll let you pick the best measure, but something that would represent where the money is being spent and which schools, because I think that's a I don't want to say misconception is the wrong word. But it's an area where everybody can be educated better, including myself, of knowing which schools are using more resources, which are using less, because there are typically just generalizations thrown out there of as to what schools are using up what resources, and there have been accusations of certain schools taking away from the general pot and not it not being distributed evenly. I think you have the platform and the data now to be able to say, here's what the actual story is. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I think what I'd recommend is we'll start out at a pretty high level and we can take future months to drill down then, so that I don't want to give you a fire hose right away, so we can. But I hear what you're saying. I've worked in districts with multiple high schools and those with single high schools. At least in my experience, elementaries seem to have less, there's a little bit of what do they get versus what do I get? But those with multiple high schools, the people do want their perceptions, either confirmed or, not confirmed, so.
And I think it would also be, for those secondary schools, it would be important data for the ad hoc committee so that they can kind of see what they're working with, right? You know,
Mhm.
which buildings have historically, not everyone in that committee is going to be able to know the numbers and recall them from memory, but having a visual
Yeah.
to see. Because again, we're looking for them to make the recommendation of the most balanced item possible, and the one that makes the most sense.
Thank you.
Any other questions, though? Anyone else? Okay, we will move on to 3D, the referendum bidding purchasing process.
So this is that item that is, kind of, trailing on what Liz was talking about. We are, um. How we're moving forward with our projects and our referendum is somewhat unique in that there's some projects that Kevin has the, skill and experience to be able to oversee essentially as a general contractor. So we're saving money by Kevin overseeing the roofing, for instance. And what Kevin and I were trying to figure out is how do we bring to the board in a timely fashion, and based on board policy, what approval level for projects. So I had a chance last week to talk to some of my peers about how they've dealt with referendums, and my proposal to you would be this. Kevin anticipates about 3 roofing projects, like he had, I think that around there, right?
One per year over the
Yeah,
course
okay.
of 3 years, correct?
That he would bring to the board. And what other business managers have said is when they're in referendum, they generally will bring the entire bid package to the board. So the structure is, sounds like in July, we're gonna hear about kind of the overall schematics and overall cost. Then, BJS will be sending out to essentially their subcontractors, here's what we want to get done, and they'll get a bid package back. And we would bring the entire bid package to the board and say, please approve all of this at once. It went to bid, so we already know it went to bid, and now we're saying, these are the best prices, please approve them as an entire package. There's going to be 3 bid packages. What is the timeline of those again?
Bid package 1, end of this month or beginning of June. Bid package 2, November of 25, and 3 would be November of 26.
So it seems impossible to come to the board and say, part of bid package 1 is the door hardware. Approve the door hardware, now approve the HVAC ductwork, right? It's all part of one bid package. So I just kind of wanted to vet that out with this committee. This is the first time I've worked through this with this board.
I mean, I think it's fair to. I don't know that any of us on the board are gonna claim to know a whole lot about construction materials or like what's in a bid package, what is the right price. That's what we're gonna defer to you as experts on. And also, I like the idea of having a bid package 1, 2, and 3, because that essentially, we don't have to look at the whole thing all at once. And that leaves us room for maybe some adjustment. Do you know, would all 3 of those bid packages fall within this current board, or would like this current board have bid package 1 and then the next board after?
November
This
20,
time,
November
next year.
26 would be the last one.
It would be
Correct.
2 separate boards.
So
So
2 separate
two,
boards.
yeah.
So
potentially,
I
depending.
like the idea of 2 separate boards being able to have a little, some oversight
Mhm.
on it, so that way, the community can we're definitely saying the community has representation there because there'll be a chance for them to have another, will be another election and, or potential spots shifting, is that correct?
Yeah.
By the time that third bid package comes in, so.
Kevin, could you, I know we've talked, I think at this committee before, but maybe you could just briefly talk again about what the projects we're deliberately waiting on for bid package 3 because of the timing of the secondary ad hoc committee.
What I can say for sure would be anything in the high schools besides the exterior. So I think before any restroom remodeling, every single classroom door is on the scope of work to be either replaced or the entry of the classroom remodel for ADA accommodation. That definitely will wait till the last bid package. The commitment to the elementary schools that I've heard demonstrated before, that'll be work in package 1 and 2. And there might be some carryover into bid package 3, depending on how well the appetite for getting the work done is in one summer, summer of 26.
And where did we land with Fisher?
Fisher, we have put a hold on.
Mhm.
All work at Fisher's on hold.
Until bid package 3 or?
Bid package 3.
I think until, yeah, because there's a lot of
There-
decisions to be made.
There could be some ramifications to what happens with Fisher with the committee, yes.
That's what I meant. It's not part of package
Right.
1 or 2.
Can I ask a follow-up question to our overall question on bids?
I think so.
Okay. So, what we're discovering as we go through the schematic design is that we can look at these projects a little differently in where we may be over budget in one building, and under budget in another, because we decided we don't have to do that project. Like, for instance, bleachers were identified for the elementary school in Madison. And I forgot the other school, but the standard for the elementary schools in the new buildings is there are no bleachers. So we asked the question, should we replace the bleachers in these other schools? And the answer we got back is it's not necessary. So there's a savings there. That's good news because we're gonna need those funds when we go over budget and other things. Do we need permission to carry money from one building to another in that manner? To cover overages and
I would
underage?
say no.
Okay.
It's referendum dollars. They need to go to a
But
referendum.
the question wasn't specifically in the referendum,
That's not
this
specific.
dollar amount for.
Okay.
As long as it's transparent that that's
Correct.
what's happening.
And you give those in your monthly
Right.
reports.
Those would be,
referendum.
yeah, so like just this update about bleachers, for instance,
Right.
that would be presented to you in some way.
Well, I believe when the board as a whole looks at we do an annual review of the long-term facilities plan, assuming that would be part of that update as well.
I would suggest this. We have the document that has, this is item A1, A2, A3. Maybe quarterly, we come to this committee with that document and say, like, I don't know if bleachers are on there, I assume they are somewhere. I think we'd want to reference that we're not going to do that project. And then the committee could also present that at the following board meeting.
Kind of similar
The
to
rationale.
the spreadsheet you showed us maybe a few meetings ago, where it was about the building projects prior, not having to do with referendum, where
Yeah.
I think we had things like the basketball,
So
so
the capital improvement plan.
yeah.
Yeah.
So where you showed, here was the original, but here's what we're actually going to do because of, here's where the real numbers are now that it's actually happening. I think empowering you to make those decisions to do the things makes sense. But I also think it all makes sense to just have something to go back and say, we can go back and say, we were told about this.
Yeah, I think in the same way you're gonna have a budget tracker, we're actually gonna take that scope of work matrix, and we've already talked about this at our 14 meetings, and it reminded me of this. We're gonna have another column that'll say the status of each project. So when this is all over in 3 years, you can go back to that document again. And for each of those line items, we're gonna have completed, combined with another project, or decided to not be necessary. And so there'll be an actual rationale or explanation or closeout of each line item.
And that's the scope of work, that's the name of the, so we could get a quarterly update on the scope of work.
Once, yeah,
Maintenance.
it's premature to have that now,
Sure.
because we're not actually bidding the work out, but as that happens, that'll be a living document, for the next, 2.5 years, I think.
Makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
And I agree with you, Jason. I think voting on the bids, each bid, makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think the board would.
Yeah.
Would do the bid package, but as far as if they're. Board authorizes
Right.
in general, here's what needs to be done and here's the money to do it. But yes, I mean, if you see opportunity for cost savings. Obviously, we would want you to be able to do that and not have to wait until next month's board meeting to make that decision. Likewise, if there is something that completely makes sense, the only thing I would ask is if there's like a major outlier that. Or something that really was. I don't know, to the lay person would just look like, why on earth would they do that? And I can't think of an example, but
I think the quarterly updates
Mhm.
will help that way.
I agree, yeah. Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, then let's move on to 3E, Director of Finance report.
Okay. We're nearing the end of the year. These are,
Now I get to start all over.
yeah, so these are the numbers through the end of April. Object 250, it's our long-term disability. We have looked at this before. When we look at just Fund 10 by itself, we're trending high. It looks like we're going to overspend. But when you combine Fund 10 and Fund 27 together, the budget is on
You
track.
can scroll down, Tim.
No concern.
There we go.
Make that a little bigger or no? Object 310 in Fund 10. This is a repeat of the past couple months. We already know our legal services are overspent. We also, in February, cut $1 million from purchase services, which was targeted to 310. So this is now showing a pretty high difference. Also looking some of the recent invoices we have, there was quite a bit of spending in communication support, but we had our director of communication position open for a couple months. So while it wasn't spent in salaries, it's now being spent in 300s personal services.
Does that show up as a savings in salaries then? Did it balance out or did it still exceed the overall budget?
I have not looked at where we're saving money.
Okay,
I primarily look at where we're overspending.
okay.
I would imagine that with the new
That'd be my
new
guess.
communication strategy that there's gonna be changes or additions to like what we had wasn't working. So we add
Sure.
tools and
Okay.
I would agree that we probably wouldn't see that for 6 to 8 months down the road, like a trend of. That stuff might get bumped into another bucket. I'm not sure.
Okay, so if there's a change in the communication strategy, then yes, you're gonna see this that reflected right here in this in personal services. When we look at 420, that is primarily apparel. And when I look at where the spending is, it is at our secondary schools athletic budgets. However, when I look at each athletic budget as a whole, they are all underspent. So this area is not a concern. 430 and 480, when we look at those individually, it's the same reasoning. We receive common school funds, which are then spent in our libraries. We budgeted 340,000, but when we find out our allocation, which is in the spring, we actually received 548,000. So we increased our spending, however, the revenue also went up. So it's showing as a concern, however, it is not a concern. We've already received the revenue as well. For Fund 27,
Probably next page, Tim.
the 170s, these are the aids. We have seen this trending high most of the year, and we will be overspent in this area. The budget just did not match what we're spending. 170s are aids in the classrooms, and it would be in our support staff aids too, so both instructional and non-instructional.
Tim, could you scroll back up? Yeah, keep going a little bit. Oh, now down. I think, and so here we can see also the 170s. And the one, so I'm confident, I reported to the board that overall our salaries are going to end up fine. Some of the difficulty Jess and I and Sarah had was aligning, essentially, is this person in the right code versus payroll? So some of what payroll is picking up is different than where we put the money, but as a whole, our salaries and benefits are going to be okay.
And overall, things are being sifted and sorted through and put in the right buckets now.
Yeah. Every year there's gonna be some variances there. It shouldn't be this big, but we might see $20,000 negative one place and $20,000 positive in one place. I would expect that. Not numbers like this.
What about, for back at, the Fund 10, for the textbooks and workbooks? That's $500,000 variance there. What does that make up primarily?
So the reason I didn't report on that one this month is because the trend has gotten better from the last time I reported on it.
Okay,
I would have to go back to my narrative to last month or the month before to see where that big spend is. But I can tell you. So was that 470? So we first started talking about 470 back in October. The variance at that time, the percentage was 603%. But now in April, we're down to 153%. So it could have been that we spent at a different time of year. And now we're getting closer to what we actually would expect.
like the purchase services narrative where it's trending better. I mean, it's a sizable amount of money. I just would like to know, like,
Sure.
is it because the board approved new courses, or was it that we had what this year the curriculum update was it was like language arts, it was the primary one that went into play?
We've implemented this year. We actually spent that money the year previous.
Okay, so
So back in November, there was $760,000 spent on workbooks that was not budgeted. However, the EBIS grant was used, so it was reimbursed. So
Okay.
we're still gonna see that as the expense.
So the variance is high, but what we're not seeing in here is the,
Revenue.
right, so.
So offsetting positive revenue
Right,
variance.
in your version of the report, you're gonna be showing not the details, but the big lines, and they're gonna all net out to very, very close.
Yeah, that example and it's called common school fund, the library money are the two best examples.
Okay.
The other thing that's at least worth pointing out, we can dig into both further, is we allow I'll call them budget managers. They're coming up. And it's gonna be better next year. I think admittedly, people would say, well, we had a lot of flexibility in our budget in the past, as long as we didn't go over our allocated amount. So what I'm getting at is you can see the 410s. are anticipated to the good by, almost the same amount as our 470s. Some of that is due to, I'll use Kevin as an example. I don't know if he actually did this or not, but I wouldn't well, Kevin wouldn't buy textbooks, so he's a fine example. But I wouldn't require Kevin to tell me, hey, I'm gonna spend this money out of 470 instead of 410. As long as the 400s balance and as long as his overall budget balances, that's what we really care about. But this extra layer for Jess reporting to is assuring that, hey, if we're off in one spot, it is going to be made up for in another.
I think just overall in general, in my day job, it's always garbage in, garbage out when you're talking about data. So not right now, but like 5 years from now, if we want to take a look back of like, what was happening in 25, 26, because we all know we're institutional spending, you're not gonna see the trends for several years, so. I think the better we get this data in the right bucket, the better we're gonna be able to use whatever the current analytical tools will be at the time to tell us. Are we like, what did we do right and what could we have done better?
Another thing we do is if somebody's going to make a purchase that they didn't necessarily plan on, we don't say use an account number where you have money budgeted. We say use the appropriate account number that describes the purchase so that we have a better understanding of what we purchased, not just where the money was. So if they budgeted in 410, but they're actually in the textbook, we say use the textbook code so we know what we purchased. So that can also throw off some of these numbers.
And just out of curiosity, do we record those differences when in some fashion, like when I don't know how you're collecting the data. Very ignorant on it, but
What we haven't done is required them to do the budget adjustment to say, hey, I had the money over here, but now I'm gonna spend it over here. They just spend it here without moving the budget.
okay, so the equivalent, so I guess what I'm asking for is. And I think the answer is no, do we have like a journal entry equivalent for a budget when they're saying, I'm not gonna take it out of the bucket that I budgeted for, I'm gonna take it out of this other bucket. You guys see it in the overall picture, and we see that both the budgets are somewhat balanced, but we don't necessarily have that piece of
Right,
detailed information.
correct. Right now, we're not requiring those.
How much burden would that put on people? I don't need an answer right now, for a future meeting, how much burden would do you think that would put on people if we wanted to record that kind of
Can I
information?
answer that a different way?
Yeah.
I think, what we put in place for next year for people is going to answer a lot of that. And maybe, I think it might be good to put that on an agenda for next month, is how we had each of our budget managers build their budget. In the past, frankly, they didn't have to tell the business office how they intended to spend their money. They just had and let's say, Principal X had a budget of $200,000. And if it had been $200,000 the prior year, probably just got pushed forward the exact same way it always had been, no matter how they had spent it. So this year, we gave them all spreadsheets that said, tell us how you're gonna spend the 200,000. And I think it'd be, on our next agenda, I can bring a few of those and show, kind of. The answer is, I don't think it'd be much work on our end now, because we made people actually identify where they're gonna spend the money, so there shouldn't be.
But in the past, it would be almost impossible to know that without going through file cabinets worth of paper, or.
Well,
Let me rephrase it.
we could use the computer.
Let me phrase it a different way. If we were to ask, if the board were to ask to do a full forensic audit to see how far back we need to go to show the public where all the $8 million or whatever was the accounting error, where and what happened, that would likely be a costly and intensive thing to do. Given the standards of what a forensic accounting report.
May I, before Mr. Ecker responds? I think the term forensic audit has been thrown around in our community.
It has.
My understanding, but I will defer to the financial experts, that the definition of a forensic audit is grounded in when something criminal has occurred.
Mhm.
And then you do a background check of what happened. In many ways, the closest we've come to as a school district to a forensics audit is when we did an accounting of where the money went for the Abbott situations. We brought in the Wauwatosa Police Department. There were federal agents that were involved. That was associated with the belief that there was a criminal activity that occurred. Calls for a forensics audit regarding misbudgeting or something that occurred that was from an accounting perspective, not an alignment with where we wanted it to be, does not qualify for a forensics audit. Is that an accurate definition?
We know where all the money was spent. That is all
think-
within and our audit confirms that.
And we do run a third-party audit every year. Every year, and that is mandated by statute. Additionally, this committee requested that our budgeting team and our financial team work with CISA 5, I believe it is, to do another analysis of the work that Jess and Scott does. I am firmly convinced, I know that the oversight that is being provided to our financial numbers right now is the most strict and the most severe in the state of Wisconsin. I don't know of anyone who's using CISA 5 to overlook their books and then have the financial director overlook the books and then have the CFO overlook the books and then know that it's almost July now, to know in about 7 weeks the auditor is going to come in and start analyzing the books for a report that will be given to the community in December or January of this calendar year. So with all due respect to the calls for a forensics audit, one, that is accurately the incorrect term to use. Two, we are providing an oversight. The last thing I would say is this. Thank you to Mike Phillips, former school board member. It was his request to create a finance and resource committee. There were years where there was no finance and resource committee in the Wauwatosa School District. So that's another layer of oversight that the board does not receive any credit for. It was due to the insight and the foresight, I should say, of Mr. Phillips to say, we need this committee. So I think we may be in year 3 or 4 of the committee. But prior to that, there was no committee of this faction. So thank you, Mr. Wadier. Thank you, financial team, for humoring me to allow me to at least put some of these accurate numbers and facts into the record, because I think we've been reacting and responding to things that are just inaccurately being shared in the community.
Thank you, Dr. Means. And then
I'm sorry.
I just had one more,
Go ahead.
because you might be able to answer it.
Sure.
Same question, same response. Since it is my first meeting as treasurer and sitting on this subcommittee, just to, I believe it was said on the public record and in a prior board meeting, and Jess alluded to it, but just for the official record, as far as anybody can tell, all of the money was spent appropriately. And there is no indication of any sort of criminal or wrongdoings or fraudulent activity which would warrant something of that level.
Correct.
Thank you.
And it's in the report, the audit report. The auditor went as far as stating that in the most recent audit report.
You did ask a direct question about how much time would things take? And I just want to clarify, so all of our financials are open records. The amount of time it takes to actually say print out a report from our financial system, that's almost no time at all. When things become difficult for our staff or create a time constraint is when someone says, I don't understand the memo in the memo in the Skyward report might say Amazon purchases for East High School. And if someone were to say, well, I want to see what all those Amazon purchases were, now we have to go find the invoice
for
that says it was paper clips and staplers, and so.
And there's no, and I think I know the answer, there's no easy way to, without throwing a ton of labor.
Correct.
There's no easy way to capture that amount of data in what we currently.
That is, that's just human work. And then where it gets even more complicated is when someone's requesting something that was a payment to legal. So the memo will say, payment to our legal firm. Then we can't even just, if it was an Amazon invoice, I could just, and the person came to the office, I'd say, here's the Amazon invoice, look at it. We can't do that with a legal document that may have personnel stuff on it. So then it has to be redacted and it's a whole other level.
Which then creates another invoice for.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
But if someone were to come and look at our payroll records, I mean, almost anything is in a file cabinet, and if they said, I want to see this and this and this, absent of being a personnel thing, we can give that to them.
And I know we're probably on the border of drifting off topic on the agenda on this, but just to toss this out as not a suggestion for now, but a suggestion for 5-10 years down the road as machine learning and document recognition becomes easier, faster, cheaper, better. If it were easy enough for someone to take that invoice and instead of putting it in the file cabinet, to put it in a scanner, and then it dumps it into digital format into the accounting system. If that was ever there, that'd be something worth looking at, correct?
Mhm.
But until that point in time, the labor, it would be so labor intensive that it would be probably irresponsible to recommend doing that.
I agree.
Going forward, we are digitizing as we go.
Okay.
So as new things come in and we're paying those, yes, we are attaching them to our financial system because it also makes it easier for our auditors. They don't have to ask for us, they can.
So we can still look it up. It's just so it's a little easier to look it up on newer things,
Yeah.
things going forward
As
you
technology.
don't have to go find paper.
Right.
But yeah, so as far as open records requests go, I would imagine having all of that dumped into a sub table in accounting system would probably be even better, and we could do other things with it. At any rate, I think that's a topic for some future board that I probably won't be around for.
You said 10 years, I'm looking around this room to see.
It's been said, so. Okay, any other questions on the financial?
Yeah, we have.
You want me to finish?
I thought you were, I'm sorry.
That's
Go
okay.
ahead.
So in Fund 27, 290 is overspent. This is something we have seen for the past couple months, but because the trend keeps going up, I'm going to keep reporting on it. It's due to our cash in lieu just not being budgeted, Fund 10 versus Fund 27, where we're actually spending it. But overall, cash in lieu is good. Object 340. This is where our special ed transportation is paid out of. And this is a very good example of
Go ahead and scroll down, Tim.
how maybe budgeting was done in the past. So we have more than doubled our special ed transportation expenditures since 21-22. Yet the budget was never updated in that time frame. So for 5 years, we still had a $680,000 budget, even though we are now spending 1.2 million. So this is where Scott and I are working together. And I've done a lot of digging into every account number, not every account number, but
We've seen it talked about it.
50% of the
Meetings, just like there, this is an area that we
yeah,
should look at. Can we optimize or does someone have an idea?
Until we get
Something that
optimized, we need to budget at where it is though.
yes, right.
Makes sense.
Yeah, if we know we're gonna spend it, why would we not put the budget there? 370, this is, expenses to non-governmental agencies, so included in here is our edu staff, so our substitutes and our tuition for alternative placement. We have taken steps to reduce the sub budget or to reduce the sub spend for this year. We also have that tuition for the alt placement. I can't tell you the exact amount of oversight we have on that, but it is trending high. 480 is our non-capital technology. There were a lot of IDEA low expenses. So that is a grant payment that we then get reimbursed for. So I'm not concerned there. And then 490 is where we pay our Next Steps program. They lease an apartment. And this is another account number that the budget never matched the lease. So we are overspending there. But we'll take steps to correct that.
So I can speak to that one, actually. The lease partner sent us, a proposal for a new lease, and Luke and Stacy have decided not to renew that and instead look for, essentially a cheaper apartment.
We are in the process. of that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So, really, for me and Jess, I think this year was a year of getting a handle on where have we normally spent our money.
Mhm.
One of our goals next year is, I like the word optimize. Are we optimizing how we spend our money? Small example, but at least one example of, do we really need to continue to have this apartment, or would another one work for? And our next step students are ones that are learning how to be independent. If they do their own laundry, I think it's generally students of high need, cognitive need, that are learning how to live on their own.
Right, so education and executive functioning
Yeah.
throughout their life,
Mhm.
Okay. Which is absolutely important and valuable.
That was my last item.
Okay, just real quick, 930, we haven't spent any money on that, what is
So
that?
930. So the trend is that we don't spend money there. We did spend 50,000 this year, so let me pull up my.
Or, yeah, I'm sorry. I
So
had
this
that
happened back in October. And this is tuition paid to Norris. It was transit aid. Norris is where we, I believe that is alternative tuition.
Okay, so not something that would have necessarily been foreseeable.
I think normally we would account for that in like 380, so DPI must have said that we needed to put it in 930 instead.
I think that is what
Yeah.
happened. Mhm.
And then,
Did you say DPI? Said we had to put it in?
Generally, we budget for any student that is going to another district, and in our case, that's usually special ed, in 380s.
Mm,
Because in our office, another district is another district. Norris is, I have a hard time getting a handle on it. It's a very unique, it's a school district that has like 50 kids or something, and they're all, nearly all from other districts. And DPI will, instead of saying, write them a check, they'll say, here's some revenue you didn't get. and book it this way instead of sending Norris directly a check.
So we're acting as the.
We're conduits,
Route,
yeah,
or the conduit.
yeah.
Okay. That makes sense, and then if it was. Purely, hey, we want you to code this here instead of here, then that makes sense as to why. It shows up as it does. That's all the questions I have.
I have one more item for Jess's report, and Kevin put it out in front of you. And this is, I think, just the beginning of a conversation that I recommend we take to the full board as, I don't know if it's even an action item, but just an awareness sort of way. So one of the, I talked to at our last board meeting about one of the big struggles I'm having is we have, well, actually, Jess, could we go back, Tim, to what you had up of Jess's and scroll up, please? Perfect. So here, okay, yeah, so if you look at the 320s, property service, you had it. Oh, you're sharing. Oh, thank you. Okay, property services 320. You can see we're anticipated to overspend. I think it's going to be a little less than that, but it's going to be around $400,000. At the end of the year, they will overspend. The vast majority of that is what I've called emergency projects Kevin had to do. Now I've been able to increase his budget some for next year, but and I'm saying him, I don't want to, Kevin's not to blame for emergency projects. I think what's to blame is there is not a way to right size that. And there's also not a way to anticipate what's going to be an emergency. For years, we've had the Fund 41 as sort of a security blanket for us. And so if we were overspending in 320s, and potentially something could be put into Fund 41 instead to kind of balance those two things out. If you look at the back page of what Kevin handed out, at the very bottom line, we can see that once he's finished all the approved projects for 25-26, we'll have what, $165,000 left in that account. And I want to raise the committee and board's awareness that the promise of putting $1 million or $1.3 million or $1.2 million, whatever, into fund balance. The part that I don't have any control over, Kevin, is what emergencies are there going to be relative to facilities? And my recommendation is that we move forward with Kevin's projects, because as he said when he was answering Dr. Means's question about the referendum, what Kevin has shared with me is all of these things need to be done at risk of us being able to have school.
Mm-hmm.
And so I pushed back at him, Kevin, and I said, well, we haven't done that. We've deferred these things for this many years. Will 1 year really matter? And Kevin's answer is, well, it might not, but we might also end up with a semi truck at West with a generator on it, and that's how we keep West open. So I like to come to the board and committee with have the answers for you. In this case, though, I can't help with a way to fix it, other than to say, if we stick to this plan and Kevin sticks to his budget, what the commitment you'd have from us is when he's spent his whole budget, let's say that is February, we would come to the board every time and say, hey, here's the emergency this month, here's the cost, so now we're going over budget by that much. Now maybe that happens in November if something catastrophic happens. Maybe it doesn't happen at all. But I just want to make everybody aware that we don't, we're not gonna have the flexibility. I wanna have the flexibility to say to Kevin, take care of that emergency out of this account instead. Does that make sense my conundrum?
Mhm.
Yes, I mean, it's risk tolerance, right? I mean, I could be insurance industry and it's always about risk tolerance. So every year we wait our risk tolerance. Every year we wait, we are saying we're okay with our risk
Yeah.
tolerance being a little bit higher. And, that's not sustainable. So
So I think,
whatever we have to do to get out of that mindset of defer.
I think the good news in this is because we passed the facilities referendum, we wouldn't really anticipate any emergencies at the elementary level. Because in the past, we would have had to address those without referendum. Now, in large part, it would really have to be the unforeseen thing.
Emphasizing the fact that if there's any calls to not use those referendum dollars, it actually puts our schools in even more risk.
Correct.
Yeah, or the budget at more risk.
Right, because it would come out of general fund
Yeah.
instead of.
Which is even worse.
Which is worse.
May I provide a little more background
Yeah.
on the rationale? When you asked me that question, I was thinking about it even more. And I wanted to provide a little historical on this. When I first presented this 2-year capital improvement plan, the concept was 2 years because there wasn't a lot of money back then. And it was back in February of 2024. So since then, this is the 4th version I presented to the committee and the board. Because some of those critical repairs we've been made aware of them over time and we've added them to here. With that, we know more information on the 25-26 line that I'm showing you. In pages 1 and 2, you can disregard because again, it's elementary schools, and that work's all covered. That's why there's nothing there. There are unforeseens here, so unknown costs. Wherever I have TBV, I need to do more study on that and determine what the actual cost is. So the risk is that cost does go up. The estimates I provided for the electrical work at West are based upon what was done at East. And again, when I recommended these projects, it was based upon the facility assessment we had done for town. And then looking at all of our other buildings and what do they not have in common as far as updates? And this stands out. This is a glaring issue for West. All of our other buildings and our elementaries will have updated distribution equipment at each building. West is the only one that doesn't have it. East had it about 2 years ago and a new generator. So this is kind of right sizes some of that equity on physical plants that makes them all on a level playing field of reliability. And like Scott said, nothing could fail. It could wait 3-4 years. And I also want to emphasize you can fix anything. So if anything broke, you throw enough money at it, you can fix it and get by. The risk is that number one, you interrupted what you're doing unplanned, and you don't know how long that interruption will be for, right? So I just throw that back. I throw that back in there as just a little bit of rationale and the way I was thinking and presenting this. It's not sky is falling. It's just, here's the recommendation based upon everything else that was just done in a historical manner. The Center Street work, we're committed to because that was a partnership with the city. We know our costs now, so I reduced that 400,000 to 250. The ADA ramp to West High, that is the opportunity with all that work going on in Center Street, correcting the staircase that's in disrepair and a danger, and now providing an ADA accessible access instead of that. So again, you can decide not to do these things and just hold on and keep the money in the piggy bank if you'd like. But I wanted you to get that information forcing back that.
I appreciate the context. All right, any more questions or things you need to cover on this item? Okay. We'll move on to the 3F health insurance update.
Tim, I shared a couple slides.
Please come over there.
Yeah,
I
we'll
will
finish
get back to you by the end of the day.
We are scheduled to meet with our employee health and wellness committee this afternoon. And we'll be sharing with them updated, if you'll go to the third slide, Tim, that would be great. We'll share with them updated health insurance utilization, one more. So the reporting for our March financial information had been delayed a bit. So we got that probably 2 to 3 weeks ago. And then just last week, we got information for April. You'll note that March was the first month where we exceeded what, if you averaged out the cost of insurance, so it was the same every month. March exceeded what those expenses would have been, and that was the first month this year that we'd seen that clearly. April ran a little bit under where February was, but we also were eligible for the quarterly prescription rebates. So that substantially reduced the costs from April 2025. The reason that March was delayed is that the team at USI was also working on costing projections for what health insurance renewal would look like in October. Those health insurance renewal projections are based on your previous 12 to 24 months. Tim, if you go back to slide 2 just for a moment. When you look at our 2023-24 plan and our 2022-23 plan, the last 12 to 24 months were pretty much the worst months we've ever had from an insurance perspective. So the way that the expense or the renewal projection works is that every month we go forward, we drop off another of one of those worst months. Tim, if you wouldn't mind going forward again to 3. So if we can continue months like February, or anything where we're trending below what that fully insured equivalent is, we will trade off better months for worse months. However, we know that based on our past 2 years, when we get into May, June, July, August, September, we definitely have seen a very consistent trend of expenses going up over those months. So if we go back to that trend, we're going to trade high months for high months. Mr. Whitehair.
Quick question, because I don't know any better. Does this insurance plan run from October to September? So what we're looking at here, if I were to compare it to a traditional January to December, if I'm looking at that at most from an HR perspective, you're also going to see the last few months ramp up because everyone who's either met their deductible or has money to spend or needs things done. It's just human nature. It's typical to see the last 3 months. And I think your previous chart, if you probably look back almost every year, the last 3 months is probably the most expensive.
Yeah. So according to our benefits consultant, USI, the end of our plan year is yearly consistent year over year. Other plans, have that trend that you described where, costs tend to go up because of people meeting their deductible, people waiting to the end to, schedule whatever procedures they need. Ours are very unique in how precise they are year over year with the same trend. So from a projection standpoint, Scott has built into the budget an 8% renewal. If we were to renew at the end of last month, That renewal was projected to be about 22%. Every better month we have going forward, we drop off a worse month from the past. So there's reason to be optimistic that, that the renewal won't actually be that. And we are looking at other plan options that would allow us to have some savings. So at our last meeting, we previewed a plan that is actually pretty much the opposite of a high deductible health plan, which are the two plans that we have. We're going to preview that with our Health and Wellness Committee this evening to see if they think that's a viable option that has the potential to save somewhere around 6 to 8% of costs off of the top of the renewal. Other options to reduce the cost of the renewal would be to do some other type of cost sharing with employees. Cost sharing means passing costs on to employees. And I've also asked for additional benchmarking data and how do we continue to compare with other school districts. We know that even though this year when we added on premium contributions, well, that was a big shock to our employees because they hadn't paid any in the past. When you look at the total employee cost on our plan, we're very, very similar to other school districts. And so what does that comparison look like now, going forward for another plan year? If we're going to look at cost sharing. The experience we're having so far is what we were hoping for, that it was getting better, but we still have a bit of a hangover from those last couple of years where our experiences were not as good.
With the self-funded insurance plan, have we looked at all of like the additional wellness programs and things like that that typically are offered where they'll say, well, you do an analysis of where and what all the money was spent on for all of those claims that it, like, for example, if 10% of it was spent on physical therapy, there are other options to supplement physical therapy. Some people might be going in for expensive physical therapy that could be really done through a virtual online version. I'm just saying there's things out there that I've seen that I've heard of. Do we have that ability to look at those things?
Yep, so we actually, in our last monthly meeting, which I think was 2 weeks ago at this point, we met with the team and dove into all of those areas. So like musculoskeletal cancers, family forming, diabetes, and then some like cardiac areas. And I might be missing a couple of the big categories, but that gives you kind of an idea. So they dive into those areas. Pharmacy is another really significant area. They do a deep dive into those areas and they identify, if you were able to promote certain, wellness plans or promote certain services, where could we see some savings? One of the areas I remember in particular is for individuals with diabetes on our health plan, that if we promoted continuous glucose monitors, that we would likely see some savings because employees' blood sugar is better tracked. And so that's, something that, we should for sure talk about is how we would promote those types of things.
Yeah, I've seen programs like, just like promoting wellness and exercise in general, where, if an employee logs let's just say 4 days of 20 minutes of exercise per week and turns that in every month, they get, I'll say $25 or $30 reimbursement added on for basically just being healthier. And because the statistics show that doing those things, those people that do those things tend to have lower claims, and therefore it can be self-funded. We
see the benefits.
see it. So and a lot of this, I know you've already said, I'm just repeating it to make sure that it's out there and look back and reference it and say, yeah, we did talk about that. So
The two things that I would share would be, this year, we've asked employees to make sure they get, employees and their spouses on the health plan, we've asked to make sure that they get a visit to their primary care provider. That is really kind of the first wellness step we've taken. That ensures that if someone has a developing or potential condition, that we try to catch it early to have the best outcomes with the lowest costs for treating that. That's one thing that we've done. We've indicated that, at the time of our renewal in October, that we would offer individuals who have employees who've gotten those, primary care visits completed, that they will have the lowest, whatever the lowest cost we can offer for our health plan is, they will have that. So that's a really positive step going forward. The second thing we did is, after our all employee health insurance update that we had, I think it was in January or February, we asked employees to complete a survey about, like health clinics for employees. And so the results were, we just wanted feedback from employees. And the results were fairly mixed in terms of if employees would go to a clinic like that as a replacement for their primary care provider or other services. Some employees who had access to clinics before said that they would be very interested in that. Other employees indicated that no, that they would not be comfortable with that. Probably the majority said, yeah, they would use a clinic for some things if it was more convenient in terms of location and depending on what services it was. But there were concerns related to, privacy, being an employer-based clinic, and wanting to, feel comfortable with the care they were receiving.
Do we offer, health services or either reduced or free? Another thing that I've seen out there where the alternative, if you have a cold or bad flu or your child has a fever, rather than going to urgent care on a Sunday afternoon and it being, I don't know, $600 bill, it can be literally done in 15 minutes on the phone, either for very little money or I know some plans just absorb that cost because it saves so much.
We have promoted and continue to promote lower cost care alternatives, including telehealth visits or online visits. We're promoting telehealth, mental health therapy as well. And so and part of what we're working on as well is getting employees to stay connected when we're providing information or updates about our services on our health plan and what care is available at what levels. If I can go back just to the employee health clinic for a moment, that could potentially be a strategy that would save us a lot of money if people went to the health clinic rather than going to other providers. But it would require an upfront investment to go ahead and get that clinic set up. Even if it's buying into a current existing employee health clinic or creating our own in some facility somewhere. So I have a reservation in terms of recommending that we do that because I just don't know based on the survey data if employees would actually use it. And that's where you have to save the money.
And the upfront cost is the sunk cost regardless of how many people use it.
Yep.
So that's where
Yep.
people have to use it in order for it to pay off.
Yeah. I would like to go ahead and, our next meeting, I'd like to go ahead and, provide, again, from a larger context perspective, what some of those benchmarks are, what are the comparisons that other school districts are having for total costs and how that compares to where we're at right now. I'd like to give you feedback on this alternative plan option that we're going to preview with our health and wellness committee. And we are inviting employees, or we have invited employees to an information update on May 29th, where our benefits consultant will be able to go through in depth our experience, and, some of the areas that we talked about, like diabetes and other services where, if employees are using some of the strategies that are available, we can be reducing costs. And we're also in the midst of, we just sent out contracts for next year and are sending out letters of reasonable assurance for support staff. So employees definitely have, total compensation on their minds for the upcoming school year. while we've had one session of negotiations with our teachers union, we do not have a settlement in terms of total compensation. We are meeting with the board about strategies and perspective on that next week. But employees are definitely, last year when, we had approved salary increases and then we got our renewal. We're trying to, again, communicate very clearly upfront about what we're looking at from a cost perspective. What we're doing, to work on these strategies. And our plan is just running, really expensive. So it's, we're using the best strategies we can, but it'll be another challenging renewal.
So speaking from someone who's gone through a lot of medical things in the last few years, a lot of the things that maybe could have helped or prevented or even just things I could have taken advantage of, I didn't know about. And I worked at the same company for this is my 14th year. And so the question is, now that we have a communications director, do we currently, or is there a plan to like have maybe an internal marketing or communication strategy for things like this to like ongoing, like month to month, like highlight a benefit or a program? I'm sure you could probably easily fill up 12 months worth of, hey, just remember, this is out here. If you need it, it's there for you. Do we have something like that going?
This past fall, we initiated a monthly employee newsletter that comes from our Human Resources Division, where we do highlight, that we had like wellness tips. We highlight a number of pieces of information about our benefits within that monthly communication. So that's one of our strategies. Our UHC as a health insurance provider is pushing out information via email to employees regularly about, one of the benefits we have is that there's like this, a gym membership and you can get 2 or 3 sessions at a bunch of different fitness facilities. So I get those emails as employees as well. So we have a number of strategies going right now to go ahead and get information out to employees. In addition to the fact that, whenever I'm in schools on building visits, we're offering these insurance updated information sessions. I mean, we really are throwing a lot of things at the wall and hoping that employees get something to go ahead and stick.
And this is maybe a little on the fringe of the agenda, but if that communications, is that something where staff like is asked to click, I acknowledge that I've read this, we hold them accountable towards that?
We're able to track click rates and open rates for our employee newsletters. We get a sense of who's reading through it, who is seeing the information. We have not made it a requirement that employees in that particular instance look at that. When employees don't sign their contracts, I mean, there are some pieces that we look at more than others. With our first few insurance information updates, we recorded those sessions and then sent them out to employees as well.
Yeah, I guess in general, I think every organization struggles with like, there's a lot of information thrown at employees, and I'd like to see the ones that pertain to our budget and how we can, like, health insurance is never gonna go down ever. It's always gonna go up. How can we best handle that? Again, 10 years from now, their rates might be, I don't know, tenfold of what we're doing now. Who knows? But I think education is the key for saving money on things like health insurance and other supplemental things that the district would be spending on time. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott or Jessica, is there anything you would add based on our recent conversations?
And just so I think people know, Sarah, if I'm not mistaken, you're sort of the lead on the staff communication. So even though we do have the new comms director, because this is something I talked to Dr. Means about, well, I think you deserve a lot of the credit for everything that's happening in this space. I know you took the lead on it. You heard feedback from the staff and I think from board members, that this was a priority, and I think it's amazing the amount of engagement you've had with our staff just in the last 12 months or shorter than that, since 10 months when we were looking at health premiums last year. So I want to give you a round of applause for all the work that you've dug into in this area.
Thank you. We will continue to try new strategies and new engagement techniques and really do our best for staff.
Okay, well, I think that brings us to, through item 3 and to 4, adjourn, confirm next meeting date. Do you want to set?
I move, or you want to confirm the
I've
next
got-
meeting date?
We don't have, like, the right copy's not in here, so I'll read it from the other one, but, do we want to set the meeting date first?
Are we planning on, we're keeping third Wednesday from 10 to noon?
I'm
My
okay with
understanding.
that. Does anyone else have conflicts?
Tentatively on the calendar for the 18th.
Yep, that's what I thought. So 10, 18 from 10
Which
to
is the
noon.
third.
Yeah.
Okay,
This was a change in chair. We thought maybe the date would change or the time would change, but I think we've decided to keep it the same.
okay.
Okay,
So then, the time is 11:48 AM. I move to adjourn. May I have a second?
second,
And, roll Liz
yes.
and Jason, yes. We are adjourned.